So we're going to take the next step in thinking about fruitfulness. What does it mean to live out a fruitful life every day? We've talked about our attitude and our thinking about it and our desire, our motivation, the qualities of fruitfulness, the power of the Holy Spirit and his wisdom. But what do we do? Well, in every human heart, Christian or non-Christian, wherever we live, we have these same questions that are part of our God-given nature. We wonder what's right, what's good, what's valuable, what's true. And where do we look for those answers? Well, in every community, as diverse as communities are, there are the same voices that we turn to help shape what we believe and therefore how we live. So every community has families. They're different, but there's always some kind of family structure. Every community has some process to educate young ones. Every community has some form of governance to monitor and to keep community behavior in a positive way. So there are social structures that are voices that influence how we answer those questions. And you think about the difference between this is a circle, it's a shape, this is a ball, isn't it? And it's round in many directions. And when we think about these voices, these structures in society, we call them spheres of influence, because the influence of family doesn't just stay here. It's not flat. It goes out into every area of our lives, every area of how we think and interact. So we're going to call them spheres of influence. We're not talking about control. We're talking about the influence that comes from relationships, that comes from example, that comes from teaching. And each of these voices in our communities are voices of influence. And each one has influence that goes out in many directions. We're going to look at each one of these one at a time and say, what is the purpose of God? What part of who he is this voice intended to express? Each of these reflects some aspect of God's character, expresses different parts of his truth when they're functioning the way God intended them. So we're going to look at each one of these, and they become a very important framework for us as educators. So here's how we're going to take notes, okay? I want you to take an A4 paper, and I want you to fold it into 3 parts, okay? So about like this, and then again like this. So it's basically in 3 parts, okay? 1, 2, 3. Okay? Then you're going to fold it in 3 parts this way. 1 and 2. Okay? So if you unfold it, you'll have 9 squares. Okay, 3 down and then 3 across. Right? Now, when you've got all those folds, I want you to take some scissors and cut a circle. And since it's all folded up, you just have to cut 1 circle and you will end up with 9 circles. Okay, so it's a short, easy way. I'm sure you do this when you work with making supplies for activities with classrooms. Okay, so I just cut my circles. Here we go. Okay. Now, we're going to use these to make a record of what we're learning about the different spheres. This shape is called a circle because it's hard to write on a ball. But remember, the imagery of the influence doesn't just go one way like a circle does. It doesn't just radiate out, but a sphere, the influence goes all around, all around. Okay. So we're going to go one by one. For each one, I want you to use a different color if it's possible. And I want you to label it with the name of the sphere. So we're going to start with family, because that's the beginning, isn't it? Everyone's born into a family. So take one of your circles and write the word family, like I did. Okay. Now, what did God intend for family? What kind of an influence did God intend for families to have? What aspect of who God is were families intended to express? Families were intended to be the source of wholeness, identity, security, belonging. Okay. That's why when it doesn't work the way God intended, it's so deeply destructive, because that is supposed to be the center of who we are, where we learn who we are. I have value, I belong, I feel secure because I'm in my family. And so you might want to write these words on the back. Okay, so belonging, maybe identity. Okay. That's what God intended that sphere to convey. And he is demonstrating God is a God of wholeness. God cares about every area of our lives, because that's what families do. As parents, you care for every area of your child's life. So God is God of wholeness. That's what family is supposed to convey. Okay, so family, belonging, and identity. God is a God of wholeness. I'll give you a minute to catch up on that. Okay. Now, the next one is also familiar to us, education. Okay. Education, different colors, so they're easy to tell apart. What did God intend for education to accomplish? What is its purpose? What kind of a voice is it supposed to bring to a community? It is intended to demonstrate God's love and mercy and his righteousness, isn't it? You expect the church, whether it's Christian church or if you're in a Hindu country or animist community, you still look to the spiritual dimension and say, well, isn't there right and wrong? Okay, so you look for the standard of righteousness, and you also expect there to be an expression of mercy. Shouldn't the church be the one that cares for the poor and needy? Where's the church when people are struggling? And so again, we're not talking about Christianity. Oh, sorry, got lost. Education. Education is about equipping, isn't it? It's about preparing each person for the future. And so the purpose of education is to create that sense of destiny, saying, I have a future and I am contributing, right? And what that's intended to convey is God is the God of equipping. God doesn't just say, well, I don't know, you're just here, do whatever. Like, no, I have a plan, I have a dream for you. Let me help you develop into all you can be. And you remember the scriptures. You know, I've designed you for a future and a hope. In your womb, I called you. There's all kinds of scriptures that say God's designed us for a purpose. So we see education that has to do with equipping, preparation, destiny. God is a God of equipping. Now, school doesn't always do that, does it? but that is the intention of God, to convey that and to provide that voice in society. Okay. Now let's talk about religion. That's what I got mixed up in. I started talking about religion instead of education. Use a different color if you can. And on your circle, write the word religion. Now, this isn't necessarily Christianity. It should be, but many communities, that is not their current majority of the kind of faith and religious experience they have. There are parts of the world that are primarily Buddhist or Muslim, Hindu, okay? But the role of religion, the voice of religion, is consistent whether or not they are currently embracing Christianity, okay? So religion, and as I began to explain, there is an expectation that religion should tell us what's right and wrong. There should be a standard. And that's why there's such bitter disappointment when religious leaders fail morally. You think, shouldn't the church at least do what's right? When there's corruption, when there's unfaithfulness, there's such bitter disappointment because even religion, even the church has failed. So there's an expectation of righteousness that that religion or the church should have a standard of purity and uprightness. And the other element is mercy. Shouldn't the church, shouldn't religion provide compassion, care for those who are sick or needy? And when that doesn't happen, there's such a sense of disappointment and anger. Saying, well, where's the church? Shouldn't the church do something about this? Even if that's a little bit of a, well, you could do something about this. But there's that expectation in the heart that if you're representing God, shouldn't you have high standards and shouldn't you express compassion and mercy? Okay, so righteousness and mercy. Those are the voices that people expect and look to religion to provide. And those are the qualities of God's character that should be demonstrated through religion, through the Christianity. Okay? Now, what's another source of influence in a community? Well, you think of government. Every community has some form of governing themselves, some form of deciding what the rules are, what the punishments are, who's going to make sure that those rules are applied, consequences are brought. Okay, and there's many different ways to do it, but there's always some system of government. So this is going to be your next circle, is government. Okay, government. Now, what is government intended to do? It's intended to convey respect for boundaries, respect, that we respect each other. We don't steal, we don't hit each other, we don't cheat. There's a respect that government is supposed to help to build in society. It has that voice that says, let's treat one another with respect. Okay, and so there is underlying expectation of order and justice and peace. And so there's an expectation that government should be bringing these things. And when government doesn't, then there's disorder. There's no peace. There's fear, there's injustice, there's exploitation. And so the place of government is an influence toward that you expect. There should be laws about this. And somebody should make sure the laws are followed. There should be justice that is applied impartially. And there should be peace. We should be protected from violence within the nation and from those who come without. And so there's an expectation there from government. That's what God intended government to influence a society toward. What does that show us about who God is? God is a God of justice. God cares about what's right and wrong, and God cares that we treat one another rightly. And he does bring consequences to his laws, doesn't he? And when there aren't just consequences, people feel so insecure and angry because in your heart you think there should be justice. Why? Because God is a God of justice. Okay. Now we're coming down. We've only got a few left, and we've got communication. Find another color if you can. It's all right if you repeat colors. It's just sort of fun to have them be different. Okay. Communication. Every community has a way of passing on the news. Now, we're not talking about gossip necessarily. We're talking about information. Whoops. And so we're looking for communication. There's always a means of communicating. Nowadays, we use phones. We use the internet. We used to use newspapers a lot, not as much anymore. Radio. Some communities pass on information by messengers. Some communities use sounds where they don't it's not easy to travel. They might make calls, they might beat drums. There's different ways of communicating information. And so every community has some form of communicating information to around the community. Now, the purpose of God is that the community is informed. And the value there is that there's truth. There's truth. There's accountability, there's transparency, there's shared information. It's not controlled by a few so that everyone else doesn't know what's happening. It's not distorted by a desire for injustice and exploitation. So it's intended to convey information, and the value is with truth. And so we see, what does it convey about the character of God? God is a God of truth. And we see in the scriptures, he says, speak the truth in love. Okay. So it's intended to demonstrate God is a God who speaks truth, values truth. He is true. And the voice of communication or media in a culture, in a community, should establish the security of, I know what's true. I'm informed. I understand what's happening around my community. And when that isn't in place, there's a lot of instability. I can't trust the news. I don't know what's really happening. I'm afraid, I'm insecure. Okay? So you can see this is what God intended. And it's intended to demonstrate that part of his character. Okay, the last one has to do, it's called celebration. Okay, so find your last circle, and you're going to write the word celebration. Okay, so maybe find a nice bright color if you can, celebration. Okay, and every community celebrates. And what we celebrate and how we celebrate shapes our values, doesn't it? What do we celebrate? Celebration. Now, celebration might be sports activities. It might be remembering important dates in the history of our country. It might be like in India, they have a Women's Day. I think Korea does as well. They have Women's Day, Children's Day, Boys' Girls Day, Girls' Day. It's what do we give honor to? What do we celebrate? Often celebrations are around memories. Okay, we remember what happened. The Bible's full of instructions about how to celebrate. Why? Because it is important to remember. It's important to learn from the past. It's important to draw strength because we remember what has happened. It gives us courage for the future. We might be convicted and remember the terrible things that happened, and it puts a soberness on it. Let us make sure that doesn't happen again. And so celebration is such an important part of shaping how we would answer what's good, right, true, and valuable. Okay. And so how we do, what's that supposed to convey? It's supposed to help us to remember. So it's memory, It communicates values, okay? And it brings us joy, doesn't it? It brings us joy. Most celebrations involve joy. Even the sober ones where we pause and we grieve and we remember something bad that happened. Often afterwards, there's some kind of joyful meal together or some way to remember, songs that we sing. Okay. And so the purpose, the value that God is instilling is we remember, it passes on values, and it should convey, it should be an opportunity of joy, rejoicing together, celebration. And what does this tell us about God and his character? That he is a God of beauty and joy. He is a God of beauty and joy. Where do we even get the ideas of beauty? How do we even have the capacity for joy? It comes from the character of God, the being of God, the values that God has for us. Okay. Now, all of these things, God had wonderful purposes for each one. And when each one functions according to God's values and God's wisdom and God's plans, reflects God's character, we begin to imagine, wow, our communities are places of justice and kindness and productivity and hope. Okay, celebration, joy, and beauty. Now, those things can become distorted. Who is shaping the message that each sphere communicates? Who is conveying the values through the actions and the words that come from each sphere? Government can become an instrument of fear, injustice, exploitation, all those things. Oh, I forgot one sphere. Hello. Economics. This is a powerful one. Economics. Okay, so last circle, economics. Economics has to do with productivity. It has to do with producing and distributing. Okay, it begins with discovery, like how do you even think of a new idea? Well, you observe and you innovate. Okay, so it has to do with new ideas. It has to do with producing what a community needs and wants, and then distributing it. Okay, so everything that's involved with discovery, production, and distribution of things that a community needs, they're all part of this sphere of economics. Now, what is it supposed to convey? It's supposed to be productivity. It's supposed to be provision, that everybody has what they need. That's the purpose of economics, is creating what everyone needs, distributing so everyone has what they need. That's the intention of God. Now, when it's done out of corruption, it's done out of greed and control, it becomes violent and abusive, exploitation. There's terrible poverty and suffering, and there's great excesses of wealth that don't come from working hard. They come from injustice and greed and brutality. Okay. So you can see the power of when these things are used according to God's will and when they're not. Now, what is this supposed to just convey about the Lord? That God is our provider. God does care. God does intend for everyone to have what they need. God is not okay with children starving. That's not his plan, and that's not his fault. When people say, how could a God who's good let that happen? The question is, how do we let it happen? So that is our final sphere. And you can see all of these together convey different voices. So it's an important part for us to stop and to realize these are the voices that are shaping our communities. And God intended for every one of them to convey messages and values and truths that shape our communities and bring blessing. And when God's people are in each one of these places, there is the opportunity for his truth and his wisdom and his love and his goodness to shape a society. what happens when there's no believers? There's no Christians in government. There's no Christians in the media and celebration. There's no Christians in education. What happens? Who's shaping the message? And then how does the community, how is the community shaped over time? So the importance of these things is for us to recognize this is how we function as a society. And we can see God has called us to take our places in our society.